So today I'm delighted to have as my guest Patricia Forde, all the way from Ireland. And why do I have her as my guest? Well, I just had bought this book, The Woordsmid, to read to my daughter. And this is a book that's gripping her, both my daughters. Very intense book. It's one of the first books that when I read it, you know, when you read to your children, they're like mostly boring stories. But this book, I think I'm literally more exciting than them to read this book because I know all the implication and what it all means. So, Patricia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. It's lovely to be here.
All the way from Ireland. And this book is so gripping. We'll talk all about it. But I think this is really the first book that I'm reading. Like, okay, that they're like, can we go to sleep, Daddy? I'm like, no, wait, just one more page. This is so important. And I'm finding myself explaining a lot of things that are happening in the book because it has to do with real life. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the book? Because you're a playwright. You have multiple books, children's books. You are a teacher. Well, all of these questions because I'm so excited. So let's take it easy. Let's take it a bit easy. Welcome, Patricia.
Thanks, Alex. So what can I tell you? I live in the west of Ireland in Galway, where I was born. And I started off, I studied languages at university. And then I taught in a primary school for about 10 years. And at about that point, I'd always been very involved in the arts. And I segued altogether then. After 10 years, I became director of the International Arts Festival here in Galway. And I did that for 5 years. But all the time I was doing that, I knew I wanted to write books for children. And I had kind of discovered or rediscovered children's literature while I was teaching. And I saw the effect it had on children. And they are the best audience in the world. They're the best readers. And they're voracious readers. You know, at 10 or 11, they're really reading. So I worked in television for a while, writing soap opera, and I was editor of a big Irish language soap opera here. And then eventually, after a long time, I thought, okay, now I'm going to write a book. And I started writing picture books, and then I wrote my first novel, The Wordsmith. So that was fun. It was a big adventure to try to write a novel.
Yeah, so you started with picture books, and then you have The Wordsmith, and The Wordsmith. It's like a game changer, I think. It's massive, massively impactful. But can you tell us a little bit about the premise of The Wordsmith?
The premise is the book is set in the future, in a dystopian future. And the melting is what I call it in the book. The melting, a huge environmental disaster has happened. And the people in the book now believe that they are the last society, the last community left on planet Earth. They live on top of a mountain in a place called Ark. But Ark comes with its own rules and regulations. The people who run Ark are determined not to make all the same mistakes again. So music is banned, art is banned, and the language of Ark is list, a list of 500 words. And they're the only words you're allowed to use. Now, if you use a word that isn't on the list, you get thrown into the forest to be eaten by the wolves.
Yeah, and Ark isn't a very nice place either. It's like a mini totalitarian state. So let me tell you about what...
Control Ark. Ark is all about controlling people because the people who run it, John Noah, who runs the world, believes that in our time that you and I talked ourselves out of trouble. We used words to hide the fact that we were killing the planet. So he decides that no longer will people do that. Now we will be pretty much the same as animals. We'll be here, we'll eat, we'll drink, we'll work, we'll sleep, and that's about it.
And this is so much a fantasy story. This kind of thing would never happen in real life, right? So let me tell you how I came across your book, because I have 2 children, 7 and 9, 2 girls, and I noticed it's very hard to. I want to teach them how to think, because in the schools it's not happening. There's a lot of propaganda also with this coronavirus going on, and what I want to do is make them teach them how to think for themselves. And on that, I was thinking to myself, how do I do that? It was never taught to me. So I went to Socrates and to see if there were books for children. And then I came across your book in a list of books about philosophy for children. And I saw the premise. I'm like, whoa, this is so important. It gripped me because, I grew up with Terminator and all those kind of movies. And this one is for children. So I bought it immediately. I haven't finished it yet. But the book it teaches my children right now the dangers of having other people tell you how to live.
I try in the book to show children that there are different narratives to describe our world. So one person's narrative, one person's truth is not another person's truth. John Noah's narrative is humans cannot be trusted with language. Humans must be controlled. The desecrators, the rebels who live in Ark, their narrative is we want to be fully human. We're not fully human, and it's better to be human. We need to express ourselves. And Letta's own narrative. Letta is the little girl in the book who's 12 or 13 when we open the story, and she is the wordsmith's apprentice. And at the beginning of the book, she totally accepts everything the government is telling her. She accepts what her boss tells her. And as the book develops, she discovers that there are other narratives, that there is not just one story. And I think that's an important message to children, that there's never just one story. Everybody has a point of view. Everybody's coming from a different place.
And that's so important. So during the book, when I'm reading the book, I'm like, okay, so how do you think that, how would you do this? How would your father do this? How would your mother do this? So also in the book, there are, how do you say that? They can't leave Ark. They can't go outside because they're told there are all kinds of evil things going on there. So the people in Ark, they have a sort of safety, but they don't have the freedom.
Yeah.
And so what is discovered is that her parents of Letta are going out in the world to explore,
and have disappeared.
They've disappeared. So she doesn't know where her parents are.
Mm-hmm.
So I was fond of my daughter. I asked her, "What do you think? Who would I be? Would I be the parent that stayed, or would I be the parent that would have gone?" And she like, "You would have gone." I'm like, "Yeah, I did that correctly."
You did something like that.
I did something right.
Yeah.
But so let's talk about the words. So there's a list of 500 words, and how do you say that?
There are gavers who enforce the law. They're like the police. Now that's an interesting word, gaver in English. I stole it from the gypsy language. It's what gypsies in their own language call the police, the gavers. And I love the sound of it. It sounds like they're going to grab you, the gavers. And in English, usually a man who runs a building site, we call them the gaffer, which I'd say is the same word. It's kind of a leader, a gaver, a gaffer. So the gavers run the world. They enforce John Noah's law. But because everything in the world, from the ecological disaster, everything is drowned. So there are no factories. There's a shoemaker. There's a person who makes all the food for everybody in central kitchen. And writing that was like writing in the past, because they don't have any technology, no phones, no anything. So that was strange. It was like writing an historical novel because it was all going backwards to what they had. I also thought it was interesting in the world, it's so cruel, the world. It's a really harsh world. And from that, the sentence, the punishment for using language that you're not supposed to use is to be banished into the forest, where again, they believe that there are wild animals and terrible things and nobody knows what's out there. So there's a feeling of threat all the time, I think, in the world. One of the elements I like is that Letta, the protagonist's boss, her master, he goes out and he digs up things from our world. So he would dig up a can of beans and he would write down the words that they don't have. So he's saving the words like an archaeologist for the time when man might need them again. And I got that awful feeling in the book that there never would be a time that they would need them again. They were now a luxury.
That's true. The words are a luxury, and we don't think about it like that. But also in the book, the school children, they only get a box with words that they can use, and it's very limited.
Yeah, 500 words, and they're always plain words. So there's no emotion, there's no hope, there's no joy, there's no love. They're tables and chairs and bread and animals. They're only what they have in the world. There are no words for animals that they no longer have, or flowers they no longer have, or fruit they no longer have. They only have words for what they have. So it's very reductive.
Yeah. So why would this be this limiting of the words? Why would it save people so they won't destroy the world again?
Yes, John Noah thinks that if they don't discuss things like revolution, or he wants there to be one idea, one narrative, one story, his story. And he doesn't want people having language who could create a different story or a different narrative or argue with his world. So you can see in other totalitarian states where they control travel or they control education. But I thought controlling language was the most basic thing of all. If you can't speak, you can't express yourself, you can't have an opinion. I thought that was the cruelest thing of all, really.
That's so true, because Letta, the protagonist, she was born into this new world, but she speaks the old language still. Because he's a wordsmith. But imagine if you've never been taught a language. Can you think the thoughts? We automatically assume we do. But what are your thoughts about that? Can we think thoughts that we don't have words for?
I think it's very difficult. I don't see how we can think if we don't have language. Letta says, how can we dream if we don't have words? How can we dream? How can we be human? How can we be ourselves without words? But if you take away the words, you also devalue the thing you've taken away. So, for instance, when I was writing the book, the Junior Oxford English Dictionary took out, I think it was something like 30 words at the time, and they were all to do with nature. They were all beautiful words like buttercup and otter and certain trees. And they replaced them with words to do with technology, to do with computers and hard disks and a drive and all that sort of thing. Now, the Oxford Dictionary defended that by saying, well, the words reflect the words children now use. So they don't talk about an otter or a hare anymore. So therefore we take the word out. But I think that's a terrible decision, because if you take away the word, if we lose the word, if we forget the word, then we will have less value on the otter or the bat or whatever it is. And that came to me from living in a country where we have two languages. We have a majority language, English, and we have a minority language, Irish. And over the course of my lifetime, the majority language has eaten so much of the minority language that the list of words that I now have in Irish is much reduced from what my grandparents would have had.
So you can compare. By the way, my knowledge about Ireland and the Irish language is only from Snatch, the Brad Pitt character. So I'm very ashamed to admit that, but that's the only thing I can think about.
Okay. Well, it's a very old Celtic language. And it's funny because a lot of the book reflects a lot of Irish history. For instance, in the book, the children have to wear a stick around their neck called a tally stick. Now, the word tally in English means to count, but the tally stick is around their neck. And every time they speak a word from the old language or a word that's not on the list, there's a mark on the stick. And when you get 10 marks, you get thrown out of Arc. In Ireland, back in the 1800s, when the British colonized Ireland, they put a stick around the children's necks in school called a tally stick. And every time they spoke in Irish, they put a mark on the stick. And at the end of the school day, the teacher would give the child a slap with a stick for every word they used from the Irish language. So for every mark they had on the stick.
Wow.
And that was how the Irish language was kind of eradicated at that time. But again, that was a control thing. The British didn't want these people that they were trying to make British. They didn't want them speaking a language they couldn't understand. The colonizer doesn't want that.
Of course. So have you noticed that there are less words now in Irish?
Yeah, absolutely.
Than there are in English? And you have maybe some examples of that?
We have many, many words in the dictionary But the actual spoken words, the language, people around me where I live who speak Irish every day, already ordinary words have been replaced in the last maybe 20 years. For example, the word for a bicycle is rother in Irish, which means a wheeled thing. But a rother now, that word is gone. And even though people are speaking in Irish, when they come to that word, they put in bicycle. So, hui me erma bicycle, they would say, instead of more rother. Ordinary words like sandwich is gone. There is a word, it's called capera, but that word is gone. They use sandwich now. So gradually the list of words gets shorter. But in a bigger, more philosophical context, the words that were originally in the language, a lot of them had to do with a parallel universe, a spirit world, a world full of fairies and witches and creatures like that. And those words were in the dictionary. Like there was a word for the way the fog shimmers when the fairy host passes through. There was a word for that. But the Christianization of Ireland, when the Catholic Church came, a lot of those words disappeared. And now nearly all of them have disappeared from the dictionary.
This is so interesting to me because I only speak Dutch and English as my main languages. So you just said it about the fairy. And I'm like, oh yeah, I couldn't describe it. I just, make it literal, but there wouldn't be a word for it. So that's very interesting to me. Do you have other examples of that?
There's a lot of examples of things to do with unseen things. Like at Halloween here in November, people believe that the fairies are out and about walking around and that you can meet the souls of the dead. And there are a lot of words about the fairy host and what you have to give them, the tributes you have to pay to them to keep you safe. So all of that sort of went. But alongside that, we were a very agricultural country. So a lot of the words, for instance, my grandparents or great-grandparents would have had maybe 500 words for different kinds of seaweed. Now we have maybe 10 that people know. People don't know anymore the difference between that seaweed and that seaweed. But back in the time I'm talking about, people did have a word for all of those things. There were words for different kind of fields, what kind of field it was, what grew there. And I don't know if you have this in your country, but we had names for the fields. Farmers would give each field a name. A lot of those things are going.
I'm a city guy, so I wouldn't know. Maybe there is. So I get the part where you eat up the language because you don't want the people you have conquered to speak their own language, and you also devalue the language. But like the fields, is also a way to reduce the knowledge of that's available, so you can't be effective.
In art, there are no books. There's no way of accessing knowledge other than what you're told. No books. So you must depend now on what you're being told. And the alternative narrative came from the rebels who tell what they know, what they've been told. They talk about art and music in our time and how important that was. They talk about how man wasn't trying to destroy the world, it just was happening and he didn't do anything about it. But they have a different story and a different version, and different people give them their knowledge. The older people in the rebels tell them, they teach them the music, they teach them the art, they tell them what their version of our world is.
So why would John Noah think that art is dangerous and music is dangerous? Because in the book they're called the rebels and they're evil. So Letta doesn't want to talk to them even because they are the people of the arts.
They're the desecrators. Yeah. Well, he thinks music and art are bad because they can evoke things in us. They can make us feel things that he may not want us to feel. They take us beyond this world. They take us to another level. Art and music say life is not just about dinner and work and sleep. Life is about your soul and your spirit and your imagination. And none of those things are important to John Noah, because all of those things lead people to become individuals, to become people, singles, instead of community.
So any emotion is suppressed.
It's not good. No, it's suppressed.
And also in music, you have also you can convey messages. Music is used for rituals.
Yeah.
Also, like
there is a scene in the book where the people are working, digging potatoes in the field, and on a shed in the field, the musicians appear and they play, and everybody is in their thrall. Everybody is taken by the magic of the music. So it takes them out of Ark. It brings them somewhere else. And like you said earlier, you're not allowed to leave Ark, but you're not even allowed to leave Ark in your head. You're not allowed to take flight and go into your imagination, because that's not considered valuable.
Yeah, because like when you go to a huge music festival and music is being played, you feel a kind of energy, a sort of
a collective energy.
Yeah, a collective energy. So that's also suppressed.
Yeah, that's also
a good one. So,
but I suppose they were all the things that were really important to me. You know, like I told you, I worked in the arts pretty much all my life. Yeah. So the arts are hugely important. But I can see how in our schools and our societies, they're not always treated like that. You know, when I was teaching, even the art, music, these subjects, these were, we used to call them the Cinderella subjects. You know, the story of Cinderella. Cinderella didn't get to go to the ball. These were the subjects that were less important than English, maths, history, geography, science. They were the important subjects. So that feeling of people not valuing the arts. When I worked in the arts, I used to often think we should have like a one-day strike where you're not allowed any music, any art. And it's funny, with COVID, we're sort of having that strike now, not because we want to, but because we have to. And you can see now people have much more value now on going to the theatre, going to the cinema, going to a concert, because we can't. It's been taken away from us.
About the arts in the schools, was there a shift? Like, was it more important years ago? I'm talking 30, 40 years ago than it is now.
No, I don't think so. In Ireland, because we were then so poor that the most important thing was to learn to speak English well and to emigrate. So there was no great basis put in education, but in society, in the communities, Irish music in particular had been the greatest comfort to the Irish people. We had a famine, we had wars, so music was always there. And I think music and the people and storytelling was always there. And before there was television or anything, people visited one another's houses on dark winter's nights, and they played the fiddle and they told stories, and that was their everything. That was their life. That was their recreation. It was their comfort. It was what brought them together. But then when, you know, we got more wealthy and we have television, we have the internet, there are a lot of other things to distract us. But I think for Irish people, Irish music still has a big part in their heart. It's still important to people.
Yeah, it's such a shame because I read somewhere that they asked children, so are you creative? So if they started in the primary school, yeah, I'm creative. And the higher up they go, the less hands go up. That's such a shame.
It's terrible. But I can't remember who it was. It was some artist was asked, when did you start drawing? And he said, when did you stop? You know, we all drew. We all
right in the fields.
We all made pictures. We all did that when we were little. And then we stopped.
Yeah, so much about, am I doing this correctly for the teacher?
Yeah. And competitiveness. You know, in every class, there is the child who is good at art. And if you ask the other children, they'll say, no, I'm not good. Alex is the one who's really good at art. You know, John is the one who's really good at running. They've already decided when they're still very young that it's the competition thing.
Why is that, do you think?
I think because our whole society is based on a kind of competitiveness. You know, it's all about winning and being perfect. Less than, that's more important than enjoying it and doing it for itself. You know, I give writing workshops to both adults and children. And, you know, I always say to them, there's two distinct things. You can be a professional writer and try and get published, and that's your job, and that's the way you do it. Or you can write to express yourself, and because you enjoy making stories up, and you like doing that. You don't have to, get it published. You don't.
And it's also very good for your own thoughts. If you write them down, like, oh, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it helps you figure out what you think.
So with my kids also, I'm encouraging the act of the creation instead of the final product.
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
I heard that somewhere years ago. So I have to remember that in case I become a dad. So
it's really difficult, because I think your children, even if you're not competitive, they go to school, and if they're good at something, if they're good at writing, the teacher will want to put them in a competition, or they want to have them stand up and read to the rest of the class. So we keep sending that message that there are people who are good at it and people who are not good at it.
So also with reading. So my girls are very good with language. They can read, but not so good in arithmetics, calculation. So.
Me.
So with language, so they're like you're a son child, so you have different levels, right? But then on the other parts that she's not that good at, it's like, it immediately becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And with all of my wisdom, I don't know, how do you feel about it? I think the arithmetic, the calculations is so not important right now. It's so not important. So I don't mind this, and they're like, oh no, I'll fail this test. Don't worry about it. Knock it off.
Yeah. Hard. I mean, when you're doing your tax returns, if you're like me, you wish you learned how to do percentages, because even teaching arithmetic nearly killed me. I hated arithmetic, hated maths, couldn't do it. But I think it's like everything. In my older years, I became much more interested in science. I had no time for science when I was in school. I thought it was maths, and I didn't like it. Now I'm fascinated by science because it's so creative and it's so imaginative. It depends on the way you're taught. I'm sure there's somebody out there, Alex, who would say, I could make your girls love maths. There is a way to teach them that would make them love maths. And maths, I'm sure, is a beautiful thing if you get it.
There's a terrible thing going on in the Netherlands right now with language. So we have a subject, and I just saw this on a documentary, that other countries don't have this. So I don't know if you have this, but it's about... if you read a piece of text, then you have to answer questions based upon the text. It's like you have to deconstruct, sort of comprehension. But it takes all the fun out of language. It's
exactly the same here.
It's just like ARC. Makes it very bland, boring. And of course, when I was younger, I hated reading books. The books were so boring. I just read the comic books. Those were exciting, but they take all the fun out of it. So that also what made me think about the book. Woordsmid, taking all the fun out of it. Yeah, of course you want.
And making us, what makes us human? What makes us different to animals? What makes us human? It's that fact that we are able to leave this world and go somewhere else. We're able to be an ark. We're able to be wherever. I mean, I was not like you. I was an avid reader. I read all through my childhood. I was constantly reading. And around me, there were always stories, because like I said, we had all the stories of history and folklore. There was a lot of that going on. So it kind of fed my mind with stories. And I think you do, as a child, you understand the world through story easier than any other way.
That's so true.
And it's interesting, there's an American writer for children called Richard Peck. He's died now, the poor man, but he said today, for some children, the only time they hear an adult voice is in a book, because they're not listening to their parents, they're not listening to older people, they're listening to their peer group, they're listening to other kids. So he said, in a book, we, the adults, can pass on our values, because that's the only voice they may be listening to.
That's why I'm also so glad about the book, because I also tell them, look, you have to, I'm like the father, yes, dad, of course, dad. I'm like, watch out, because people are trying to do this. Like, yeah, dad. But in the book, it's a story that takes them. So it's not my words.
Yeah.
So like, and this is what I mean. This is what I mean.
Yeah, it has to be an exciting story, I think. True. You have to see it as an adventure story. And because I worked for television, one of the things I learned was how to get them to turn the page. The end of a chapter is always a cliffhanger. They need to know what the next thing is. And that was good training for writing for children, because they're a very tough audience.
Yeah, now I know you did a soap opera, so now
so
stay tuned next week. So what was I trying to ask you?
But of course,
about sorry, did you get your inspiration also from the 1984 book? I'm sure that many people have asked you this.
I don't remember much about it. I read it when I was very young, but of course I know the main idea of it. I think the other huge influence was the whole environmental crisis. You know, where I live is in one of the most beautiful parts of the world, and on the edge of Connemara, one of the last great wastelands of Europe. Absolutely beautiful, very delicate, very vulnerable, full of, you know, the sea and mountains and lakes. It's a very beautiful place. So with global warming and the way people react to that, you know, that had a big influence on me. I was thinking about that a lot when I was writing the book.
In what way?
I was trying to imagine what would happen if the ice caps melted, if the whole world was flooded. What would that be like? What would it actually be like? Because we are the ones, we're seeing it happen. We're part of it now, and it's happening quickly. But, you know, if you roll on the film, how much worse will it get if we don't do anything? And then of course, I started to imagine what would happen if we lost everything that we have, like all the technology, everything was gone. And that's where Ark was in my head, that place way in the future. But also just the whole idea of being reduced again to, they have wind power in Ark, but they have very little else. And, you know, if you took away all the things we have, all the trappings, where would we be? And like I said, it kind of felt like I was writing an historical novel.
Well, we'd be in the Thunderdome, Mad Max. You know that, right?
Yeah. That's where we're headed.
Yeah. So, do you see any? I see a lot of things that are happening right now. That you could say that's a big coincidence. You see the word police, the thought police. A lot of emphasis on words. Don't have
Twitter.
Trigger words. I'm like, when did this happen? Trigger words.
But also with Twitter, where you're only allowed so many words. You know, you're not allowed to say it. I was listening to an historian in Ireland recently on the radio, and he said, Twitter is the worst thing for us here in Ireland at the moment. We're it's hard to explain. We're in celebration mode now, as in not celebration so much as remembrance of, it's 100 years, the Civil War, all those things. And he was saying that because of Twitter, there's no nuance, there's no light and shade. People can say in their little quick few sentences which side they're on, who's right, who's wrong. But it doesn't leave you room to discuss or to tease out the nuances, the subtleties in that.
This is what you see that's being created. All the nuances are gone. It's either you're for us or against us. Left versus right. Are you? So it's all. In my view, it's like if you want to gain power over people, just make them into two groups, and don't make them talk about stuff. So that's what you see right now.
Twitter doesn't allow you to talk, you know, for 500 words. It doesn't allow that. So you have to say it quickly and without any context. Donald Trump does it all the time. There's no context. He just says, I won the election. I won by a lot. There it is. You know, there's no time to interrogate him or ask him to explain that because it's short. It's a telegraph.
And also, if you go to with all the social media, it's short, and it's the primary function is to keep you on the platform. And the creators said, we screwed around with your dopamine levels. So sorry about that. But only outrage is supported by this.
And like you said, everything is black and white. There's this side and there's that side. And you're with me or you're against me.
And the skill to see nuance is also disappearing.
Yeah.
And you know, also with the trigger words. You know, when I was young, of course you had bullies, but you were taught how to fight for yourself or how to discuss. But right now, it's like people outsource their own emotions, their own incapability to guard their emotions, and say, "You have to be careful with me." Yeah. It's so strange. So what happens then? Self-censoring. I can't say this because otherwise the other person might be offended. But then you get a country of very weak people.
And then also you have people who have no knowledge. They've no information or education. So they say their thing, I'm against vaccination. But if you push them, they can't tell you why they don't have that information. So it's all reduced to, I'm on this side, I'm on the anti-vaccine side, you're on the pro-vaccine side, and we never debate it or discuss it, because that's not what these platforms are about. They're not about discussion and debate. They're about declarations of this is where I stand.
So that's also why I was searching for those books, because I want my children to have nuance, to think about stuff, other than just talking to me.
Sorry.
Just your phone.
Just a minute. Oh, it's okay.
So a very big part was also after the melt, the climate change. So
Yes.
the ice caps were melting. So have you about language, how it works, with euphemisms? Have you done also? Were you also critical to climate change?
Was I critical of it?
Of the way it is presented to us, if you take into account different kind of
John
words.
Noah, actually, it's funny because, again, about nuance, John Noah is the bad guy in the book, but I agree with John Noah about a lot of things. John Noah was, in our time, an eco-warrior. So I agree with a lot of things he says. So one of the things he said was that in our time, we used words and language to fool ourselves into thinking everything is okay. There's no problem. It's all, this has happened before, and it's not because of humans. That whole story that circulated that global warming doesn't exist. So for John Noah, he was saying it was language that allowed people to persuade other people that there's nothing to worry about. Whereas I'm with Greta Thunberg. I think the house is on fire. We better start worrying quickly. But the other narrative is, nah, it's all fine. Nothing bad's going to happen.
Yeah, so I was curious how you did your own. How did you come to that conclusion, knowing that maybe there are other forces that are trying to fool you?
Yeah.
So how did you do that? Because it's very complicated with language.
Yeah, it is. And the whole idea of global warming, I suppose the more you read and the more you educate yourself, and the more you see the science isn't refutable. There's science and there's science. There is nothing in between in my mind. So what the scientists have been saying now for a long time.
Look what you did. That's pretty black and white.
Yeah, it's very black and white. And somebody said, if you know the conclusion already, there's no discussion. But I do believe that the science of global warming is correct, and there's no doubting what's happening. If you talk to gardeners here, people who garden, they'll tell you spring is coming about 10 days earlier now than it was 10 years ago. That's a huge difference. I mean, we only have to look around us to see what's happening. The way, again, no more than words, we're losing, I don't know about your country, here we're losing insects. We're using insects in droves because of insecticides and all the things they're using in farming. We're losing birds. We are destroying the planet. And I like that image that Greta Thunberg had of the house is on fire, because I think we have good intention, but we lack urgency. We're lacking speed.
And I'm also with the global warming, like something can be true, but it could still be deceptive. And just like when they say we have to have green energy, I don't know how it is in energy in Ireland. And then it's found out that a lot of green energy isn't actually very green, or that in Europe, big companies, they can't have too much waste. And then they have to purchase a lot of credits, certificates. And then there's also those kind of things. So it isn't black or white.
And are we going to make the same mistakes again? Like you said about green energy, isn't that green? Is this just going to be another way for capitalism to make money? Everything will be green, but it won't necessarily be correct or safe. And that's what you're trying to teach your girls. We need to question everything.
Right.
The only thing I'm not questioning is I do believe that global warming is happening. It is real. Everything after that, I think you have to question. You have to ask yourself, like you said, how is green energy being produced? How are these things that we're being told are ecologically sound? We need to interrogate them. We didn't interrogate enough of the last technology we had.
What I want is that my girls say, I also say to them, the only reason I know more than you is because I make more mistakes than you. I've made more mistakes than you. So I hope that you girls will teach me a lot. I don't know if I'm right, So that's
But I've great hope for the future for those with kids. I think our kids are generally great. I think they are inquisitive and they're curious and they're not as passive as we were. I think when I was a child, we were very passive. We listened to what we were told. We believed it. I don't think children are like that now. Really? Certainly Irish children are very curious. They want to know why things are happening.
Okay, that's good, because I have the opposite views, but I don't go to schools as much as you. I think a lot of the children now are very, very passive and are not inquisitive. Yeah. But you see the opposite.
Well, I do, I suppose, because I'm coming into the class to talk to them about creativity and imagination, so I find them very curious. Maybe their own teacher would say they're not like that for history or, for something else. But they like talking about imagination and creativity, and they still love reading. They still, an awful lot of children read a lot, which is brilliant. They love reading. They were telling me recently, there was a survey done in Europe, I think, and children are turning away from Kindles, from devices for reading on. They don't like them. They like the object. They like to be able to see the book. I see it with my own daughter that she loves a book as an object. She likes arranging them on a shelf. She likes owning them. And the Kindle doesn't give you that. She likes giving them, if she reads a book and she likes it, she wants to share it with her friends. You can't do that with the Kindle. So that gives me hope that they do like that.
Yeah, that's true. It's a totally different reading experience.
Yeah.
So there's also a part 2 that's coming out. And I read the I have to buy that one, of course. I read the premise. Like, it's pretty dark.
Pretty dark. Mother tongue is where Letta has escaped out of Ark. There's a price on her head. She's a wanted person, and she's running with the rebels in the forest. And this is very much about conflict. And there's a section of the rebels who believe that violence is the only way, that they have to fight, and they have to kill people, and that's how it's going to get resolved. And then there's another gang led by Fionn, who was in the first book, and Marlowe, who believe that negotiation is the way to go. But again, there are different narratives. Things you think are the right thing to do may turn out to be the wrong thing to do.
You have to have been inspired by the left and right.
Yeah, yeah. And the extremes of that.
When I was young, the left was were the hippies. The flower power, and the right were the aggressive ones.
Yes,
it's and completely upside. Yeah. So what happened? Right now is the left is violent and the right is passive. So strange.
Very hard to know. But in that book, I was just trying to talk about, we have a long history of conflict here, and the peace agreement isn't that old. So all through my kind of teen years, there was talk about the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, who believed that violence was the only way. And then you had other politicians who were trying negotiation and the power of discussion and debate. So I tried to put that into the book, that different people, they're not bad people, they're not good people, they're just different people who had different ideas of how to go about it, how to fix it.
And I don't know about the answer to that one either. If you're suppressed, do you need violence? But it's also about
during what we call the Troubles here in the 1990s, up till then, 1980, 1990, when there was, you remember in Northern Ireland, there was a lot of conflict between the British and the IRA. But at that time, a law came in that the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, could not be seen or heard on the media. So they couldn't speak on the radio or on television. And the way the broadcasters got around that was they hired actors to speak the words that the rebels had said. So for about 10 years, we were looking at actors speaking for the Republicans. It was just bizarre. It was absolutely bizarre. But
never heard that, but it's really weird. But it's also, things are going on around the world are also very strange. But also, in the sequel, it's about the kids being kidnapped, right?
Who has been?
The kids. The kids are taken away, and they're brought up
babies.
without language.
Yeah, there are babies disappearing.
Yeah.
There are babies disappearing all over Ark, and nobody knows what's happening to them. Now, interestingly, the book is dedicated, the Irish book is dedicated, I have to read it to you, in memory of the Tuam babies and all children without a voice everywhere. Now, the Tuam babies, Tuam is part of Galway where I live, and recently they discovered a huge grave in an old sewage tank full of babies, small children. And these were children who were thrown in there when they died in the 50s, 60s, 70s by nuns who were running mother and baby homes. So women who were not married went to these Catholic places where they had their baby, and they were treated very badly. They were treated like slaves. They weren't allowed to leave. And when the children died, some of them died of, natural causes, but they died. Some of them died from malnutrition. They were just thrown into this tank. This is a story that's happening now. They've uncovered this now. They've found the bodies. And there's all kinds of law cases being brought to try and get DNA tests to see who these babies are, where's their family. So that was happening when I was writing this one. And also in America, with Trump separating children at the border, where people were coming from Central and South America and their children were being separated from the parents. And many of those children have never been reunited with their families. So in the book, there are babies disappearing and nobody knows why. And in the end, it's an experiment that I read that if a baby doesn't hear language in the first year or so, they will never speak. No matter how you try to teach them after that, they won't be able to speak, because you have to, as a human being, hear language in the first couple of years. So in ARC, they think that if they keep the babies from hearing language, then they can destroy language altogether in humanity. There will be no language. So that was it. And it's amazing, when you're writing, things are happening around you and you don't realize that they're going to become part of the story. And when I started writing the book, the whole thing about the babies, I didn't realize I was writing that, because all around me there was talk of babies and babies being taken away. And I remember saying to my husband, when did we start waging war on babies? I think the youngest baby in America to be taken from his family was, I think he was Romanian. He was 4 months old and he was never returned.
The hard thing is that science has done a lot of experiments also with children, not giving them attention. So if you're not talking to kids, you're not giving them attention. So they can't, how do you say that? They can't bond. So they're lose part of their humanity. It's very, very dangerous to do this.
Yeah.
But they have done all these kinds of experiments. It's fascinating that you say that we're waging war on babies right now. So
when did that happen? When did people think it was okay to take babies off their parents, and because they were illegal immigrants, that they could be taken away?
Yeah, I've read I read about the Trump part, but then I also heard other things that said no, they already were with different parents. So it's
I don't
good to
believe that. I think they were taken away. No, I think they were separated from their parents.
But maybe if it's a trend, it's very fascinating, because what happens if you have children without father, mother? It's they lose all stability. So
but isn't it our greatest vulnerability as well? If you want to hurt us, what is your greatest vulnerability? My greatest vulnerability? It's our children.
That's so true. Yeah,
that's what keeps you awake at night, not yourself. It's your children and worrying about them. So it's like as if somebody identified the thing that could most hurt you. And that, again, is control, isn't it? That's the way we control people. Control their... You
fear.
love children, so we'll work on that. We'll instill fear into you about your children's safety, not yours, but your children's. And that will reap rewards.
That's so true. So do you also have happy books?
Yes, I do. I do have happy books. I have
because the other ones are so happy, colorful, all colorful books. So that's why I said this one stands out.
Yeah, the latest one I wrote was for very small children, but it's about a legend that I grew up with here. There's a legend that an island appears off the west coast of Ireland every 7 years, and it's called Hy-Brasil. And when I was a child, I used to go down to the sea hoping that I would see it, because every 7 years it would appear, and I never saw it. So I wrote a picture book where a little girl goes to Hybraza and sees all the wonderful magic and everything. And then, like me, she looks down from the sky and she gets homesick, and she sees her own town and she goes back home, because I never left my hometown. So I think I would find it hard to live anywhere else.
So no dystopian future. Final question also about the spirituality of Ireland. Where does that come from?
Where does that come from?
Yeah, well, why is it in the culture? Is it also in English, the English culture, or just is it typically Irish?
Death itself?
No, the spirituality. Yeah, no.
Death,
but the fairies and...
that's a very Irish thing. It's a very Celtic thing. We believe that Ireland was founded by a group of people called the Tuatha, who flew in on a storm, and they took over the country, and they waged a huge war with another gang called the Firbolg. And one of them won and stayed here on the earth, and the other one disappeared into the mountains and into the sea and into the rivers, and they became the fairies. And they're very connected to the arts, to music and beautiful things, and they live beside us in another universe. They're there alongside us all the time. So that was kind of what the country was based on. And then out of that came, eventually we had Christianity. The Roman Catholic Church arrived, and they just took a lot of the gods and the goddesses and the fairies, and they turned them into Christian saints to make it easier for people to understand Christianity, to tell them that narrative, that story. Yeah. So there's a very famous saint in Ireland, Saint Bridget, who is a Catholic saint, but she was actually originally the goddess Bridget, a pagan goddess. But because the people loved their goddesses and their gods, the church didn't get rid of them. They very cleverly, they just took them and said, no, this is not a goddess, this is a saint. Yeah. And they changed the story. But Irish people are very stubborn, and they, despite Christianity, the fairies live on. I mean, there was a road built here not that long ago through an area where there were fairy trees. And people came out and protested and said, you cannot knock the trees. And when they did knock the tree, a lot of accidents happened on that road. So even now, people will not cut down fairy trees. And there are particular things we don't do. There's a beautiful tree here called the hawthorn, and it has beautiful white flowers in spring. But ever since I was a small child, I know you never bring them into the house, because they're the fairies. They are the fairies tree, the fairies flowers, and you don't bring them into the house. So and I wouldn't do that.
Are the fairies the good guys or the bad guys?
No, they can be both. They can be very mischievous, and they can be very cruel. And the fairies, they're your friend if you do everything correctly. But if you don't treat them with respect, then they can become your enemy very quickly, and very powerful enemies. People were so afraid of them in my grandparents' time, they wouldn't refer to them by name. So they would refer to them as the good people, or the little people, or themselves. But they wouldn't call them the fairies, because they thought that wasn't respectful. And it's funny, you know, in Harry Potter, have you read the Harry Potter books?
I've seen the movies.
Yeah. You know the way they say, don't say the name. You don't say Voldemort's name. Yep. You never say his name, in case that would draw him on you, that he would then find you. And it was the same with the fairies. You didn't say their name in case they noticed you.
Because language is also spells, maybe, yeah? A vibration of sounds.
Yeah.
You know, if you...
and if they took you, and they did take people, they took babies actually, they often would take a baby and replace it with a fairy baby. Now, a fairy baby, you may have had one, fairy babies are the ones who cry all day and they don't sleep at night. And people believed they were changelings, they were called. They believed they were fairy babies. And terrible things happened, because the way to find out, was it actually a fairy baby or your own baby, was to put it in the fire. And the fairy baby...
Like with the witches.
Yeah, terrible. Exactly. So
do you know where the story came from the war? I can't pronounce how you call them, the fairies against the other, but where did that story come from? Do you know? Is it, yeah,
that's mythology. Like, that's way back prehistory. A lot of there are a lot of creation stories in mythology in every culture, and ours was based around the fairies. I think it's similar maybe for the Welsh and the Scottish. They would have similar stories. All the Celtic kind of countries would come from the same family of stories.
Yeah, because worldwide there are very similar stories about entities are coming from another dimensions. So you see that a lot. So I'd never heard it about the Irish. So that's why it's so fascinating.
Yeah,
it's also always a battle between the two races.
Yeah, and the idea of another race living in the mountains, living in nature, living in rivers and the sea. And also I think the fairies were seen as being very close to nature, being very environmentally friendly. So you didn't want to upset them by upsetting the land either.
Okay, so it's fast. I have to read up. I have to read about this. Are there any good books about this?
I'll send you a list.
Send me a list of books. So for all the other people, so this is of course the book, the Woordsmid. I'm telling all the Dutch people, they need to read it. It's very exciting book.
Thank you, Dutch people.
So, thank you so much for this conversation. I was delighted that you said yes. I just sent you an email. You said, yeah, of course. I'm like, whoa, she did. So that's awesome.
I really enjoyed it, Alex. It's good fun talking to you. And
I
please tell your girls I'm delighted they liked the book.
So thank you.
We'll have to send
one last request. Can you say their name and maybe say something sweet about them?
Sure. What are their names?
Esme and Megan.
Lovely names. Hello, Esme. Hello, Megan. Megan, I have to tell you, my new book has your name in it. But I love the name Esme as well. I may have to take that. I may have to steal that. I find as writers, we do a lot of stealing. So they're beautiful names. I'm so excited that you like my book. And I'm dying to hear what you think of the sequel. It's great that you're reading. So keep reading.